everybody. One of the comments I see most often on my videos are from people saying, "Damn you, James, now I'm stuck on Auto Trader looking at whatever it is you've been driving today." Well, I can assure you that no matter how bad it is for you, it's a lot worse for me, because I've actually got to drive these things. And today, I'm revisiting what could be one of my great automotive regrets, the Peugeot 306 GTI-6.
Have your favourite YouTubers inspired you to buy something potentially unwise? If so, you need CarVertical, the super-powered search that cross-references a number of databases internationally to give you all the important information on any potential car purchase. Clocking, accident damage, theft and outstanding finance, all things you need to know about. With CarVertical, in just a few moments you can have a detailed and easy-to-read report on whatever you're thinking of buying. Regardless of whether it's a Peugeot or a Porsche, I use CarVertical every time I buy. The service is also now available on mobile, and for a special discount, follow my link in the description or the comment section down below.
About 6 or 7 years ago, before I'd even started my YouTube channel, I decided I wanted to buy a track car. However, I had a very limited budget. So onto eBay I went, and luckily, way back then, you could actually buy a fairly decent car for very little money. What I wound up buying was an E36 BMW 325i. In fact, I actually bought a pair of them, though the second one I never really saw. That was a spares car for the main one. In truth, the whole experience was entirely miserable. Back then, I was still working in film, so I did try and book a couple of track days. However, on one, the car broke down, then on the other, I got work. And I couldn't turn that down, because if I did, I wouldn't really have any more money to go playing with cars. However, one of the other cars that I could and should have bought was a Peugeot 306 GTI-6. It was entirely standard, barring a stripped out interior. And for that car, the seller was asking a buy it now price of a princely 800 quid. Today, to get you into a reasonable condition 306 GTI-6, you'd have to pay about 10 times that. And it's one of those cars that every now and again I go looking for in the classifieds, only to say, you know what, no. Too much money, I surely wouldn't pay that much for one of those. And today, I'm just checking that I'm making the right decision. This is an example of a Phase 3, so the last iteration, and is also one of the final GTI-6s to roll off the line, being made in 2000, the final year of production for that model. Confusingly, there was never actually a normal GTI. The 6 in the name refers to the 6-speed gearbox, so if you're looking for an earlier 5-speed variant, you won't find it. They made it, but rather than calling it a GTI, it was called the S16, 16 soupape, for 16 valves. Compared with that, this car has a slightly peppier engine, a 2-litre making just shy of 170 horses, and of course the extra ratio, which as a quirk also means this car doesn't have quite as much right look as it does left. For me, the 306 is one of those cars that not just does everything for everyone, but it's also a car that really has aged very well. The Phase 1 cars I think have dated somewhat, but the Phase 2 and 3 still look brilliant. In terms of hatchback design, I think they're one of the all-time greats. They're also one of those cars that comes from that era when a vehicle didn't have to be massive to have plenty of space in it. So, at a push, you could get 4 adults in this, and perhaps more importantly for me these days, the boot is actually a pretty reasonable size too. Fuel economy from that 2-litre 16 valve is also acceptable, somewhere in the mid-30s if driven gently. Jack has only recently acquired this car. If you want to know a little bit more about it specifically, you have to check out his channel. That's number 27, home of the world-famous Influenzo. If you haven't heard of that car or Jack, please go check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. He has a bit of a thing for quirky cars, old French hatches in particular, and previously owned an example of a Citroën BX GTI 16 valve known as the Tomato, a car that I am now the owner of. In case you're wondering what's happened to that car, no, I haven't sold it, but I also haven't done all that much to it. It's away having some work done, and don't expect an update anytime soon. Now, as it happens, this isn't my first experience of a 306 GTI-6, but the last one I drove was a little different. That was an example of a rally, which was essentially the 306 Club Sport, so had all of the same mechanical bits as this, but with a load of stuff chucked out. In the day, that of course made it cheaper, and now people will pay more for it. So you had no aircon, lower rent trim, etc, etc. This has niceties, so it has air conditioning, it has a sunroof, it has electric windows. It also has sensational steering. The weighting in this is beautiful. The last few days I've been driving my 550 about, and this I would say compares very favourably in that regard. It is also a car practically born for these kind of roads. Despite being a twin cam lump, high revs really isn't where this engine shines. Instead, it works best in the mid-range, between 3 and 5. The gearbox, I also have to say, is a lot better than in the rally that I drove. Nice, short throw, actually fairly satisfying action. Previously it was pretty much a low light of the car, so I'm glad to see that here it's a lot better. After all, the whole thing that made this car special was its gearbox. Back then, a 6-speed was a pretty rare thing, even in some exotic stuff. The pedals do take some getting used to. The most frustrating are the brake and throttle. You would imagine a car like this would be set up perfectly for heel and toe. If anything, you might think the pedal box would be a little bit too cramped for daily driving. But actually, the opposite is true. I've got my Pilates on today, which are not especially narrow, and my feet are fairly wide. But even so, heel and toe is an issue, as is this bleeding turning circle, which has nearly got me into trouble a couple of times. Now, this being a number 27 special and a car that, to be fair to him, Jack has only recently acquired, there are a few things that need doing to it, so it should be considered really a work in progress. The tyres are ancient, but like all Ferrari owners, he's allergic to replacing those, so I'm gonna ignore those. The brakes he's been having some issues with, and it can allegedly pull to the left on occasion, but today is behaving itself. It also has a certain level of patina that it has acquired over its many years, and there are some quirks too, including the fact that when you turn it on, it will say the oil is practically bubbling over until you turn the lights on, then off, and it behaves itself perfectly. Despite the elderly rubber, grip levels are still good, the handling balance is sensational, and I can see why this car was so revered by the motoring press. There are, though, some issues. Some I would criticise as faults, some instead things that get in the way of me owning a car like this, or more accurately, putting hand in pocket to pay the money asked for a car like this. They include the fact it is inescapably cheap and French. This is not an inherently bad thing. When you're paying 1,500 quid, 2 grand for one, that's absolutely fine. But at the prices people are asking now, so a good example with low miles can be over 10, that's a little bit more difficult to stomach. Particularly when the interior, even in the nicer GTI-6, isn't exactly fancy, and it has a thing for rattles, these cars. The gear lever down here is going absolutely ballistic. The hatch at the back is making all sorts of noises too. Jack has had a few attempts at fixing that today, and I know he will get to the bottom of it, but he hasn't just yet. As I am totally useless with a set of spanners, this is a somewhat terrifying prospect. These are also cars that were very cheap for a very long time, and as a small little fairly pokey French hatchback, they are ripe for being bought by the sort of people that don't really care about them. I am a bit of a freak for a comprehensive history folder, and finding one of these with one of those is a challenge. By the time you have, you then also wind up in the position that you're probably not going to want to pay the money being asked. And though for myself or my partner driving about, this car really does everything that we would need, if we're to take any more than 2 people anywhere, it's still going to be just a little bit awkward. The 3-door shape I absolutely love. I wouldn't have anything else, but that's the problem. I should have something else, a 5-door at the very least, but I know what I'm like. I just wouldn't. The BX at least does get around that problem. I must say I am quite impressed with the action of the switchgear. The indicator stalk is really quite nice. The electric windows work. They're even fairly sprightly. It is also a massively satisfying car to drive. I know that Jack was in a little bit of a quandary as to whether to buy this at all or not, and I think he should be very glad that he has, because it's a cracking little car. think it actually makes a reasonable noise. From in here, the main thing you can hear is the gear stick rattle, but from outside, it's got just enough so that you know it's a little bit fruity, it's a little bit different. I wouldn't do too much to it. Oh, there's a steering wobble as well. I've just been reminded of that by the wheel. At motorway speeds, it does also rev a little higher than I would like. We're currently doing 60 and it's just below 3,000 RPM, so 70 it's going to be just over. It also isn't massively well insulated, so even here at 60 mile an hour, you've got a fair bit of wind noise and things coming through the cabin, but truth be told, I don't think that's really a massive issue. The other thing getting in the way of me buying something like this is that I already have a semi-practical classic daily driver in the form of my 968, which is currently resident in Scotland, but that's my own fault, that's nobody else's. And funnily enough, much like the 968, which is also praised for its handling, this has McPherson strut up front with torsion beam at the rear. A very basic setup, but they've made it work. Probably helps that this car is actually relatively lithe at around 1,200 kilos. So heavier than my old Citroen, but without the fancy pants suspension that has. And I've got to say, this actually works really well. It's damped just nicely for these kind of roads, though the suspension may now be past its prime. It copes with the road surface quite well, but also has a surprising amount of firmness. Doesn't roll all that much in the corners. I like it. An annoying amount. Would I spend 8,000 quid on one of these? I don't think I really would. However, can I understand Jack buying one? Yeah. And do I regret the fact that I didn't get one when they were $2,000? Absolutely. This is a good car. Anyway, that's enough from me. A huge thank you to Jack for lending me his car. If you want to know a little bit more about it or the others in his fleet, including the famous Influenzo, the mighty Bismarck, and also a very, very iffy looking Lotus Elise, check out the channel number 27. And as ever, all that remains for me to say is a big thanks to you all for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.